reverse of his previous statement, right? So, okay, so you have this. Now I'm trying to
I like how you highlight, because I didn't think of it as an image of him going up to him with an empty bowl, asking Joshu, the question that he's like, have you eaten your right porridge?
So rice is the plain old staple. Everyone knows about it. No one necessarily likes it, but it's the food of the gods.
Hi, you're listening to another episode of Not Zen, where we talk about Zen, whatnot, and occasionally, what's not. Today we have a smaller cast than usual. Just Brian, Dan, and Jim, myself. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yo, this is Brian. Let me know if you can hear me.
I hear you. This is Dan, hearing Brian loud and clear.
Very cool. And this is Jim, hearing Dan, hearing Brian, loud and clear. Today we're looking at the Blue Cliff Record, one of the Zen classics.
Wow,
Dan,
when are we going to get some new books, am I right?
Right. It's been thousands of years now.
They're big books. There's 1,000. There's 1,000 cases per book. There's 100 people know about. Then if you put in the right cheat code, you get 990 more.
You know the cheat code?
900 more.
Isn't it boobs backwards?
As much as I want to be like, it's religious obfuscation which has caused this book to not be known, it's also just a big fucking book.
Yeah.
And we are doing, oh man, I just had it. Case 80 of the BCR tonight, the Blue Cliff Record. I believe that's it. Picked by Dan.
Yeah. And just as the podcasts go on, I will give a shorter and shorter one. For new listeners, Blue Cliff Record comes out China, 1200 AD. See for my Christians out there. Zen Master wrote it, took some, interactions between other Zen masters in the past, little stories called cases. And he writes some commentary to give us, for him to tell us about Zen. And he's a Zen master, so he defines it. So we get a primary source talking about secondary sources, which is pretty cool. And his name is Yan Wu again. So if we mention that, that's who we're talking about.
Right, great. And tonight's case is called Joshu's A Newborn Baby. Once again, Joshu's A Newborn Baby, Case 80, the Blue Cliff Record. Dan, do you want to read it?
Yeah. So this is, now my translation says Joshu's newborn baby, as opposed to A, which is fun because it makes it sound like Joshu had a newborn. Anyways, all right. So this is Case 80, the Blue Cliff Record. The case is thus. A monk asked Joshu, does a newborn baby also have the sixth consciousness? Joshu said, like tossing a ball on swift flowing water. The monk also asked Cao Zhu, what is the meaning of tossing a ball on swift flowing water? Quoting what Joshu just said. Cao Zhu said, moment to moment, nonstop flow. So we have, does a newborn baby have this sixth consciousness? We'll have to talk about what that is. So we have that question. Joshu, Zen Master 1, says in response, like tossing a ball on swift flowing water. So then we have a monk asking a second Zen Master named Dao Zhu, what is the meaning of the thing Joshu said, tossing a ball on swift flowing water? And then Dao Zhu says, moment to moment, non-stop flow. Very wet case, very moist case. And
right.
For the listener, we are recording this on 420, hence choosing this case. And in celebration, we are drinking a Wicked Weed, pernicious IPA. So thank you, Wicked Weed, for sponsoring us with a beer that I brought for all of us.
Thank you, Dan, for the beer.
Of course. I got it from a guy I met named Steve last time I was at your place.
Oh, I'm so glad you must have run into each other as he was
I caught him on the way out.
Wow, and he gave you beer. He's always got some on him.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was like, I guess you are the kind of guy that just has a 60-pack of beer on you.
Right. I mean, the trench coat, you could put a lot in there.
Yeah, that's true.
Is there anything that jumps at people right away from this case? Now I'm reading from Ciceda's version, which is objectively worse, and I say that after reading it for more than a year and a half now. At least I tend to really not like what Ciceda says in his notes and how he translates things compared to Cleary or even Wonder Wheel. But sorry, does anything jump out at you guys that you wanted to touch on?
Well, while you mention real quickly, while you mentioned the Ciceda thing, and I think it is fun to hear on air if new things become things. But what do you think about us doing a segment where we talk about this case, and then later we can do a segment where then we talk about cicadas and we compare and contrast, since that kind of we can maybe use that as a representation of what a lot of monasteries in the West might be saying.
Sure, I'd be fine with that. Depending on the order we do, I'll probably have to, obviously I have Ciceda's translation. I don't have the notes from Yan Wu. So I'll just be in the commentary mode. Right.
We will equip you. But Brian, I think you were about to say something. Brian?
If you we can start off with a real big view, and I just cut them off. Cases 78 to 84 are each one of them a case that is one metaphysical directly, as opposed to some of these sort of encounters, or at least as in this one, the encounter includes some sort of metaphysics. Alternatively, sutra quotes. I can read you off the titles. 16 Bodhisattvas go into battle. Tatsu's All Sounds. Chaochu's Newborn Baby. The Elk of Elks, you have to read that one. That you can't tell by that one by the title. Talong's Hard and Fast Body of Reality. And there's a couple more. Yanwu seems to be on at this point in time when he was giving these specific lectures, or when he compiled these lectures in this order. He seemed to be onto something here with all this sutra quoting right in this part of this book. And it's bookend by Yunlin's Cake and the Hermit Fang Makes a Tiger's War. So, kind of curious there.
So we have like a little, maybe an arc, we could say, in the Blue Cliff Racket around this section that kind of, I would say, returns to the metaphysics, because I feel like the first maybe 10 cases is kind of like it's like a survey course. You get a little taste of everything, and then you seem to have like little arcs that iterate on various things, and it's interesting that this far into it, we get this metaphysics arc. And for listeners who aren't familiar with this term metaphysics, it's kind of like a question about what fundamentally things are, how fundamentally like things work, right? Like we have physics, so metaphysics, right? Like what are there really, are there really stars, or do we just see things and call them stars? Things like that. Questions of consciousness.
It's like stepping out of a frame and seeing how everything actually works, right?
Yeah.
With the meta.
Well, in this one, it at least gets at it almost pars the famous case of Joshu's dog, where a monk asks, "Does a dog have a Buddha nature?" We have a monk asking, "Does a newborn have the sixth consciousness?" Which is at least a little bit more direct, right? I mean, I'm sure we've all wondered growing up, like, how do babies think? Like, do babies think, right? And this one's asking, do babies experience? But it's asking in a much either more specific or less specific way, depending on how we want to take it, which is an interesting way to just begin with it. And whether or not that's actually what's going on, it at least, I think, is what's going to stand out to most people originally, of this kind of asking about, okay, are rocks conscious? Okay, well, are babies conscious?
So this isn't, do babies have the Buddha nature? Or it's just whether or not they have the six senses, which is sort of a proto-psychology in Buddhism, at least.
Well, the sixth consciousness is one of 8 within a model that at least would be familiar to these guys. And so Yanwu tells us, and I'm quoting from the commentary here from, again, the Zen master author Yanwu. He says, sense faculty, sense objects, and consciousness of sensations are 3. Which is really interesting, right? We have sense faculties, eyes, ears, mouth, nose, whatever. Sense objects, the things that I'm sensing, and then consciousness of sensation. It's cool that he has that third one for the I am aware that I am sensing a thing. I might actually call that memory, but that's a different podcast. He says, originally, we are unable to discriminate among the sense objects before us. Which is interesting that he's saying this, right? Because we have in developmental psychology, we have the baby calls the cat a dog because it associates a dog as a thing that walks 4 legs. Anyways, originally we are unable to discriminate among the sense objects before us, but the subtle inner faculties can produce consciousness. The subtle inner faculties can produce consciousness, and consciousness can reveal the discrimination of forms. So before anybody wants to jump in and I assume the listener by that, and jump in and be like, oh, okay, so it's about not discriminating. Well, we have Yanwu straight up saying right here, the consciousness can reveal discrimination of forms. And then he says, this is the sixth consciousness, conceptual thinking. So specifically by sixth consciousness, we have this maybe object-oriented programming going on. The ability to discriminate between forms as opposed to just kind of like feel things. See things, touch things, but being able to make them things. And then he goes on to say the seventh consciousness is something called manas. It can take hold of imaginary things of the world and cause a person to be vexed and troubled so that he doesn't attain freedom and independence. I might just interpret this off the dome, and I'm probably inaccurate about half of this, but that's fun to be, as imagining hypotheticals, basically. We are the animal that can enter the time dimension a little bit and predict in the future, hypothetically. And then he says, so we have the sixth is the ability to discriminate various sensory input into objects in the world. We have the seventh being that which can take these things and then imagine hypotheticals. And then we have the eighth consciousness. Yanwu writes, it's called the... Why did I do this to myself? It's called the Alaya Vijnana. Alaya Vijnana. It's called the Alaya. And it's also called the storehouse consciousness. It contains all the seeds of good and evil. And now my first thought with that was the tree of knowledge, tree of good and evil, but I'm just going to leave that at that. But anyways, so Jim, you brought up the good point of what do we mean by this sixth consciousness? We have a framework of the 5 senses. Then we have the sixth one that turns them into objects. Then we have the 7th one and 8th one.
So would you say it's kind of like a Buddhist psychology? Or phenomenology even?
Definitely seems to be referencing an existing one, but I'm not as educated on that as Brian might be.
Well, I'm not either, regardless of whether it's Buddhist or not. Well, this case is a great example of how the Zen masters, it shows us what the Zen masters like to read. One of our friends asked, do Zen masters philosophers? But this shows us that sometimes Zen masters philosophized. And also, or used philosophy to explain ideas and concepts related to the ones they wanted to get through. Anyway, Yanwu, more than any other part of this book, in this case, he just mentions the books he's getting it from. So we don't have to say Buddhist. I guess if you're a Buddhist and you want to grab all the cool things that people wrote about Buddha, go for it. You can have Zen too if you really want to do it that way. But yeah, they're just saying Lankavatara Sutra, the Sarangama Sutra, which would have been very popular sutras. This would have been like the Easter Bunny type of shit for these guys.
You have really good points. Really clear. I turned to page 440, and one paragraph from the Nirvana scripture, and then the next paragraph again from the Surangama scripture, again from the like, yeah,
Right.
it is very Aristotle-y.
Yeah.
Ar-
And
Aristotelian?
and I'll just mention that the voice of this part is
This does not
different.
read like normal Yanwu. You mentioned that earlier, and as I was reviewing this, it's like, oh, I can see what he's saying.
What about it is less Yanwu-esque? Too structured? Too academic?
Yanwu is less talking about the people in the case and or the people adjacent to the case, people in the lineage and stuff, and he's literally just talking metaphysics, or he's talking these sutras. He's naming a spot of a sutra and then gives you a little talk on it.
Right, it's like notes
Which
that you
is-
would run in. Yeah, that's more
Not
of like
like-
modern day notes. Right, where they explain the references.
Well, I mean, a lot of Zen masters did that. Like, Foyan doesn't quote sutras, but he does give long talks on things. Hyun Yang, he has a whole commentary on the Diamond Scripture, or the Diamond Cutter Scripture, or whatever, or the
Diamond Sutra.
shit, I can't remember, the Diamond Sutra.
A boy Deshaun.
So it wasn't weird, but Yanwu definitely, and we could talk about like a lot about how Yanwu is and what he does. But he'll give you a pointer. I don't know, but I'm going to bet there's no pointer to this case.
There's not. Good call.
Yeah. So he gives you a pointer which sets up, here's kind of the point I want you to know, but put that aside, look at these people. And then he talks about the people, right? And then Zuedo gives his poem and he talks about Zuedo. And that's the basic format.
Yeah.
But this is not that. So that's kind of how it differs. It's more just he seems to be having fun with philosophy. And it's cool. We get to kind of glimpse at what he likes.
He really does start engaging with it more than we typically see, and it's a longer commentary on the first part. By which I mean to the listener, there's two. The commentary is typically broken up into two parts. He gives a commentary after the case itself, and then another commentary after this other Zen master we mentioned, Zuedao, after his poem, which is included for each case. But yeah, not very much after the poem, but we got 3-4 pages on the case, commentary on the case.
So Joshu's answer to that, whether or not a baby has the 6 consciousnesses, or the 6th consciousness, what does he say in Cleary's?
He says, like tossing a ball on swift flowing water, which I love.
Now
right?
that, when I read that, and it's very similar in Cikitas, the first thing that I thought of was Joshu responding is kind of a meta commentary on the question itself, as opposed to answering the question directly. But it could be read to be either way.
Oh, I see this one as more of a demonstration of the baby having a 6th consciousness. Of like, he's like, well, I throw a ping pong ball in a river. I mean, you got to be careful with cliches. Clearly go with the flow is going to come to mind here. I mean, go with the flow. Queens of the Stone Age, behind the frame is where we need it now, right? But anyways, they are cliches unless you actually can make some substance out of them and not just associate them with a bunch of memories. We don't need to go into detail if those are the same thing or not. But it's when I throw a ping pong ball in the water, it goes with the water. Though it affect the water the way that the water affects it, right? Newton's 3rd law. Let's not forget that. Equal and opposite force. But luckily the monk asks again what that means, so that helps us out. Yes, another Zen master, Daozu. What does that mean? The tossing a ball onto swift flowing water. And he says this answer, moment to moment, nonstop flow. Are you ever not going with the flow? Are you ever not like a newborn baby? Going with the flow. Because we've talked in previous cases about, things like what is the sound outside the gate? Is there an outside the self? Right. In this one, it would be, is there a flow? Is there water that it's going with? It's like, well, he's saying it's going with the swift flowing water.
Right.
Or at least he's saying that the consciousness is like, the sixth consciousness is like.
Yeah, my impression was Joshu's response was basically saying, you're just like the baby who is like, you have the sixth consciousness as well. It's just the same. To some extent, the question specifying a baby is almost beside the point.
Well, what's cool is we have right exactly what you're saying, or relevant to what you're saying. For the listener, Yan Wu scribbles in addition to his commentary, he scribbles in a little footnote after typically each line of the case. And so right after the part where it says, does a newborn baby also have the sixth consciousness? When he initially asked the question, Yan Wu writes, with a lightning flash intellect, what newborn baby is he talking about? Is he talking about his inner child?
Is he literally holding a baby?
Yeah, he's like, hey, this is my kid.
Is he stupid? Right.
How smart is it? Yeah, is this kid dumb or not?
Yeah.
I put his food under a blanket and he started crying.
Yeah, after this, I mean, with Tosu, in Sakita's translation, we really get into a very selective interpretation and a whole bunch of problems. So I'll lay off reading that for right now.
Well, no, yeah. So we can use this in future podcasts, that episode of the dichotomy. But let's jump into it for now. So what do we have in the Sakita? My laptop's actually sitting on top of the Sakita, my Sakita, so I need to move it.
Pretty good use, if you ask me. I'll just read the whole case. A monk asked Joshu, does a newborn baby possess the sixth senses or not? Joshu said, it is like throwing a ball into the rapids. The monk later asked Tosu, what is the meaning of throwing a ball into the rapids? Tosu said, nen after nen. Without ceasing.
Man.
Right, so that already tells you where this is going. So for listeners who don't know, nen is sort of a term that, I've looked into it briefly, it only shows up in this translation. It's not really talked about anywhere else. It almost seems like it's Sakita's invention. And it basically, a single nen is a unit of consciousness or cognition. And first nen is pure cognition. Then comes second cognition, which is recognizing that you're seeing objects. So you have like a duality. And then the third nen is attaching meaning to what you're seeing, that they are objects and they have names. And then the fourth nen is essentially conceptual thought. And the whole point is to get to that first nen. And this becomes more relevant when Sakita starts talking about the baby, but I'll lay off of that for right now. We can touch on that soon because it's quite a bit. But
it was 6 years ago that I bought 2 Zen Classics as my first purchase of a Zen book for the MumonCon. And I remember coming across this Nen idea, and I Googled and could not find anything on it.
It's
couldn't find anything,
and it's
on
a shame.
But
this is the translation most people get, and it's pretty bold.
Yeah, I mean, it's the top result on Amazon.
It's pretty bold to drastically change certain words into a self-made invention with a text that's thousands of years old. Now, you can be free to do stuff like that, but then also when you're writing the notes instead of the original Zen master, I mean, that's just another level of like potential dubiousness.
Yeah. Or you can do whatever you want, like Blythe does, if you put the Chinese characters themselves.
Yeah.
But I will say, I tried to steel man in my head, Sakita a little bit and say, okay, well maybe the translation said something like being aware of moment to moment, and that reminded him of Nen. However, and so to recap for the listener, what we're talking about right now is how in Cleary's translation, we have the response of what this tossing on a ball of swift flowing water is. In Cleary's translation, we have Daozu saying moment to moment, nonstop flow. Whereas Sakida's version is nen after nen without ceasing. As Jim said, nen seems to be this idea that Sakida potentially created or at least heard from a closed room, because I can't find things on it. At least I couldn't when I looked for it. But so I was wondering, maybe it's something like the Chinese characters were suggesting being aware of the moment. However, luckily we have our third translator who kind of acts as our tiebreaker, Wonder Wheel, who explicitly makes a point to translate all cases as literally as possible. And his says moment to moment, unceasing flowing. So it definitely seems to be like and if first out there, if you got the Chinese characters, hit us up. But it definitely seems to be like it is specifically, at least the characters are once for time, not once for attention. Now we can talk about if it's about attention, but that's a second layer on the actual words.
What was the Sakida's one again?
Sakida said nen after nen without ceasing versus moment to moment, nonstop flow.
Pure cognition after pure cognition is basically what Sakida's saying. But it's a little more than that.
Well, yeah, and with translations, you can always sort of, one way to look at them is to look at which one is more nuanced. And that's going to be just a starter of a clue to which one is more accurate. In textual nuance, not cultural nuance, as Sakida is cultural nuance. But here we have the nonstop flow. It connects it with the rest of the case, which is talking about water, etc.
I was just about to say, all else equal, he at least committed the greatest sin there is, which is being unpoetical, as Blight says.
Exactly. That's another way to say that, yes. Whichever one is more poetical is probably the more accurate one, considering we're literally talking about
once you put in
poets.
a self-made theory, model. Maybe model's the word here.
And maybe let's be clear, like that word could exist, and we might just we're like racist
right, we just
or
don't
something.
know.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe it just isn't translated to English much, which is why I say, I will phrase it as and it's been a while, but I struggle to find anything about it on Google. But I don't think it really matters if how selective it is, at least in the scope we're in here.
All I have at my fingers are bad notes, and we could use that as a way to get at what the case is maybe really about, but that's all I have on the table right now. So that's just kind of my disclaimer. So if you have something, please.
Okay, I grok. All right, so we get a little bit of not rambling, but we get a little bit of maybe stream of conscious, pun implicitly intended, from Yanwu on this one, where he kind of lets himself just kind of flow, and he says a lot of things like the one of enlightenment must be, or as he puts it, one who studies the path. Well, I guess I'll just read this exact part. Although a newborn baby is equipped with the six consciousnesses, though his eyes and ears can see, he doesn't yet discriminate among the six sense objects, which is interesting because he's saying it's equipped with the six consciousnesses, but doesn't use that sixth one. Doesn't discriminate among the six sense objects. At this time, he knows nothing of good and evil, long and short, right and wrong, or gain and loss. And we have three shoulds here, right? Good, evil, right, wrong, gain, and loss. But we also have a non-should, long and short. And I feel like that's probably intentional. So he's just talking about things in general. And then he continues, a person who studies the path must become again like an infant, which sounds like something Sakida would eat up. However, is it just as simple as that? So we continue. Then praise and blame, success and fame, unfavorable circumstances and favorable environments, those things, none of these can move him, the baby. And then in quotes, though his eyes see form, he is the same as a blind man. Again, though his eyes see form, he is the same as a blind man. Though his ears hear sound, he is the same as a deaf man. End quote. He is like a fool, like an idiot. His mind is motionless as Mount Sumeru. This is the place where Patrope monks really and truly acquire power. And this is definitely something I think we need to rip apart, because there's so many ways that can be taken as just don't discriminate. Like, if you find yourself with your discriminating mind, don't discriminate, right? Or we can just simply say that that's meta picking and choosing, and that's what they're talking about, and don't meta pick and choose whether you pick and choose, right?
Right, yeah, that's probably the most problematic thing I've ever heard Yanwu say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it just sounds like Sakita.
It does.
And I do think it ends up... I mean, it also sounds like Taoism. It sounds like... Usually you just don't hear that. I'm surprised. I wonder... You know, could it have gone through certain stages where other writers were adding to it?
I mean, there's a question of revisionism. There's a question of what if we've been wrong this whole time and it is Sakita's way, right? However, 1 out of 8
Right,
sounding like that probably doesn't mean that.
right.
It might mean that somebody read a handful of cases and cherry picked to create the Sakita religion. But because we keep going and we get things like Yanwu saying, without making a sound, he goes beyond the ordinary and enters sagehood. The reclining dragon deeply fears the deep blue's clarity. If human beings can be like this always, how can a single name remain in the world? Though it's why they must go on to leap out of their nest before they attain, which I'm going to take the liberty of saying, you got to be able to do both. You know, he says, how can a single name remain in the world if you do this? But they must be able to leap out of their nest. You know, you can do this and then there's no more starfish, right? You just see things. You don't name them as starfish when you're looking at a starfish. But they must be able to leap out of that nest before they can attain and see that a mountain is a mountain and a river is a river. Even if you have this stream of phenomena, as someone once said.
Right. Ideally, I mean, even with Yanwu kind of philosophizing, obviously you should be able to do these things. You should be able to philosophize, name things, talk about things.
And he is, right?
Exactly.
So, you know.
Yeah.
And now what's cool is I hadn't thought about that before, but I thought about it just now as I read this. One of the first lines in a case or pointer that really struck me as I started studying Zen was, one must be able to kill without blinking, or kill a man without blinking an eye before he can be said to walk hand in hand with the patriarchs. And it makes me think of this coming and going. You don't turn the starfish into not a starfish by just seeing it as a set of sensory images, but not even that, right? Just experiencing the sensory images. I can experience a human being as a human being, or also suddenly just experience a set of sensory input from, right? And then later we can attribute them to, like, oh, that's, you know, my friend. And that quote was brought to mind when I heard, without making a sound, he goes beyond the ordinary and enters sagehood without making a sound. But as we know, Zen is a sword that kills and gives life, and this sounds like the killing part. But you also must be able to give life, which kind of jives with him saying, though it's this way, they must go on to leap out of their nest before they attain.
You're still a fucking baby.
You gotta be able to walk in the world, man. Goes back to that quote that I'm going to quote as much as I can, you know, from Blythe, where he's like, if I want to say that the wall in front of me is not a wall, that is my poetic right. However, if I say that the wall in front of me is not going to hinder me if I try to walk through it, I shall be given 3 more,
Right.
all padded. And I'm sure 1 or 2 of our listeners maybe have this guy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him, but he talks about, no, he's talking adjacent to Zen is what I'll say, at least as a topic. But he talks about how like a good guru will also like make sure that you're not in a scenario where if you find yourself in like street looting, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna join this street looting since that's going with
Right.
the flow.
Yeah.
You know, I'm playing a character in D&D now that is a Taoist taken to the literal sense, and I'm literally playing the game where I go with the flow of whatever's happening. And now it's led to the point where it's like he has a curse where like if our party is fighting some monsters, sometimes I have to fight on the monster side. like if you just go with the flow
Right, I
too
like
much,
that.
things get crazy.
Well, should I read some of these notes? I mean, they're similar, so I mean, we can just
Yeah, I think
yeah.
yeah. It's a fun game to compare and contrast, especially when it requires the nuance that this does.
Let's see. I don't want to waste our time, but I also want to give some juice. So, all right. I mean, it's all crap. So this is his notes on does a newborn baby possess the six senses or not? So right at the beginning. In Buddhist psychology, the six senses are seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting together with the activity of consciousness. The Buddhist psychologist also conceives of seventh and eighth senses. These relate to deeper levels of activities of consciousness. The seventh bears a certain relationship to the modern psychologist's subconscious. The eighth is thought of as having no particular activity of its own, but as constituting the foundation of all other conscious activities. We experience it at the deepest level of absolute samadhi. That's a specific technical term that Sakita uses to basically say meditating in a cave for a million years and then coming to awakening. So kind of a absolute samadhi, no object-subject split. Anyway, the experience of it gives the Zen student the firm conviction of returning to his original nature. This fundamental absolute samadhi.
I would strike him out of the room the second he says returning, right?
This enables him to imagine that the mental life of a newborn baby must be largely at the level of this eighth sense. Its senses and consciousness being not yet fully developed. The monk in this this enables him to imagine the mental life of a newborn baby must be largely at the level of the eighth sense, its senses and consciousness being not yet fully developed. The monk in the case had come to see this from his own experience, but was still not certain of it, and hence asked Joshu this question. One thing that's kind of interesting is, and maybe it's obvious, the monk is using the baby as a tool to try to grok enlightenment, I guess. I guess that's clear from the outset.
It's a thought experiment, right? I mean, that's what the human being's all about for the reasoning aspect. Suppose this, or at least, maybe this example might answer my question if I can get this. Or I suspect Joshu's going to say this for this, and that means I'm maybe going down the right flow. But
well, we know that this monk isn't asking for a simple answer to a philosophical question.
He's asking about enlightenment, right?
Well, the notes indicate that it's a very adept question.
Yeah, we get the right after the part of the case where the monk approaches the second Zen master, Daozu, says, "What is the meaning of," Joshu's answer, "tossing a ball on swift-flowing water?" Yanwu writes a note saying, "This too is adepts studying together. Understand? It's gone by. The ping pong ball is still flowing." So it's clearly it's an intelligent question. Now there is and the golden intersection, the center of the web, the final Jenga block here is this moment to moment nonstop flow. So he talks about someone of the path must be able to do blah 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 blah, right? But then, okay, what is blah blah blah? Well, it's moment to moment nonstop flow. You are like a baby this whole time, and I'm gonna double down by referencing what later I assume we'll talk about more detail when we talk about the poem, where the line of the poem quoting it says, "On the boundless swift flowing water, tossing a ball, Yanbu says, consistent from beginning to end. It's gone. What is he saying? Consistent from beginning to
Right. You can't.
The baby goes looking for babies, except it doesn't. The baby.
Yeah, you can't. You can't escape the moment.
No escape.
Speaking of babies, when the baby is babbling, he symbolizes the person studying the path, with his detachment from discriminating mind that grasps and rejects. That's why I'm praising infants. I can make a comparison by taking the case of a baby, but if I say that the baby is the path, people of these times would misunderstand.
Could you read that last line again? That was great.
I can make a comparison by taking the case of a baby, but if I say that the baby is the path, people of these times would misunderstand.
Mm.
So, for all of the explicit sort of sutric and metaphysical quoting, we also have a more than usual explicit warning, where he literally just says, look, this is just an example of a thing I'm trying to say. Don't try to be like a baby.
Yeah.
And reading that and the parts beforehand make me wonder how specifically they're talking about the making mental formulations of what is and isn't enlightenment versus, and this goes beyond even, or this extends outside of the topic of Zen. You have kids in, I've graded kids' math homework who think that, okay, doing it this way is going to solve it. This is the way to do it. And then they can't find it. And then sometimes they'll even accuse the question of missing data or having a incorrect answer, right? And it's like, nope, that wasn't the way to do it. This, if you come in thinking that's fine, but at least be on the lookout for if you don't. And how many of the guys come into the Zen master are like, okay, so I got it. So like enlightenment is all about a computer that becomes self-aware of itself, being aware of itself, right? And so like you do that infinite times, and that means that like, so enlightenment is that. And it's like, hey, hold on, chill out for a sec.
I think. Go ahead. I'm bringing up a new topic.
Real quick, I'll just say I cite that with the part right before you read, Brian, where another Zen master, Shandao, he says, haven't you seen a little one when it's just emerged from the womb? Has a baby ever said, I know how to read the scriptures?
Nice.
At time, it does not know the meaning of having Buddha nature or not having Buddha nature. He's just chilling. Hi, I'm Dan.
Yanwu basically says that as well later.
I guess I wanted to, Brian, if you can hold your thought for 1 second more. I really like that Yanwu kind of goes out of his way to be like, look, it's sort of like a baby, but it's not about being a baby, right? And you could argue that Sakita's doing something similar, but I want to read this note and tell me whether or not, it's not as long as the last one, whether or not that seems to be the case.
This is a Sakita note?
Sakita note. And it's on the sentence, it is like throwing a ball into the rapids. Moment after moment, the ball floats on with the stream. It has no time to stop and reflect upon itself. It corresponds to the action of the first Nen. A newborn's baby's senses may not yet be fully developed, but as such as they are pure, not yet overlaid by the delusive activity of consciousness as in an adult. The baby is capable of pure cognition, though that cognition is not fully developed. Full-fledged, pure cognition is achieved by the practice of Zazen, in which the delusive action of the third Nen is cast off. So he does some nasty things there, am I right?
The very first thing he does is give the actual translation. Because remember how we were talking earlier about how he says Nen after Zen without ceasing?
Yeah.
Right after he says it, he says moment after moment the ball floats
That's
on
hilarious.
with the stream. So he knew damn
That
well
was
that
some
was
nasty
the translation.
verbiage of him.
He knew
He
damn
deserves
well.
a spanking.
He's the only baby. who
But
needs
I'm
a
not going to
stepmother.
blame him too much because Yanwu is also fucking with us here. So
Right, he got tricked. Well, I just don't like the. So he said some stuff similar to Yan Wu, but then you have the delusive activity of adult consciousness, and then at the very end, you're like, and this can only be surpassed by practicing Zazen. And it's like, all right.
Yeah. You get in a really great conversation on Tinder, but you're talking about something philosophical and you're like, yeah, no, and it's really, really good. And and when you think about it this way, and they're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. You're like, yeah. And then you end up realizing that, like, really the only solution to come over tonight. It's like, wait,
what?
hold on a second.
So this is actually the opposite of what Yanwu said. Yeah, so Yanwu did an anti-should and Sakita did a should. So Yanwu says the baby is not the path. Done. Like, you should not try to be like I'm not telling you should try to be like baby. Or I'm not or you should look for a mind or a set of just giving you some words, some tips, some pointers. On the other hand, Sakita says if you want to be like this, then you do this. And which means he's not explicitly but implicitly implying that this is the way to go. The baby is the path. Because he's giving us the exact goal, the way to achieve babyhood. Now, he might not say that, oh, it's not exactly baby, and to be fair, he doesn't. He's like, it's not baby, it's something else. But even in a pulled out meta way, he is indicating that he is making the baby the path. Do this, become like I'm saying right here.
Sakita is, or
yeah, Sakita is, and Yanwu is not. In fact, I think he's doing the opposite. He says, "I'm just making a comparison case of the baby. If I say the baby is the path, people of these times would misunderstand."
I think that's it's a great line. But yeah,
And that's kind of I think it's a
saving line. I should say.
It's metatextual. It's kind of a hard one to explain there, but we can move on. I'm gonna claim that Yanwu's fucking with us because there's just let's ask the question if and Sakita even sorts of asks the question, if an enlightened person is like a baby, is a baby enlightened, and why or why not?
Yeah.
Right? Based on a lot of what we have here, the answer would be yes. But it's clearly not the case.
If a stop sign is an octagon red? And in the same vein, I'll draw attention. The 4 statements of Zen don't say anything about doing anything, right? It's not about when you do this, you're enlightened. Well, I guess we could say realizing or seeing. I guess we could say seeing is a verb, but it's not doing a thing. It's noticing, right? When you see your true nature, you become a Buddha. You don't see yourself not doing the Buddha nature thing, then do it. It's not discriminating. And we have right before the when he talks about, that's why I'm praising infants. I can make a comparison, but if I say the baby is the path, people would misunderstand. Right before that, he quotes, one of the many sutras he quotes in this, where he says, haven't you seen where it says in the Henyen Sutra, a bodhisattva of the 8th stage, immovability. Now, there's lots of words, so I'm going to draw attention to certain ones for the listener. So we have this stage, from Buddhist lore, immovability. And he's speaking poetically, right? There's not stages in Zen. Immovability turns the great Dharma wheel in an atom of dust using the wisdom of non-activity. You might think the Western mind might be comfortable more in thinking, of like the idea in sci-fi where the warp drive universe moves around you, like space moves around you. You don't move through space, right? Maybe in a poetic way, kind of you can use that intuition. But anyways, so turns the great Dharma wheel in an atom of dust, really tiny, using the wisdom of non-activity. So he's not doing anything, and this brings to mind Wu Wei, but we'll talk about that in another cast. And then he says, at all times, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, he doesn't cling to gain or loss, but lets himself move and flow into the sea of all knowledge as a proper noun, all hyphen knowledge. When Patrobe monks get here, they must still not become attached. They follow the occasion freely. When they have tea, they drink tea. When they have food, they eat food. And then emphasis here, neither the words concentration nor not concentration can be applied to this transcendental matter.
Nice.
Again, neither the words concentration nor not concentration can be applied to this transcendental matter. So it's not about a state of mind.
Right, I really liked the last one. I mean, it already demonstrates that non-concentration or concentration isn't the deal, but then it goes on to say, but it's also not non-concentration, right? So
it's not even a variable.
Right, exactly. So it's not dudism. It's not Taoism. It's not just like, relax, dude. You know, take a fucking spliff and eat it. Whatever you do with weed. I don't know.
Happy 420.
Right, yeah.
As Reggie Watts once said, I know about the dubage. I know how to apply it. Yeah, I mean, we get this. You're doing it. You're flowing. Right. And I definitely had a similar thought to you, Brian, as the... it does seem like he's fucking with us because he's just going and going and going for like a page and a half. But then he actually starts quoting things that say kind of the opposite. He's like, blah, la, 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 la. Just be like a baby. Be Alice in Wonderland without asking questions. Like, all right, you know. But then it's not. Then he's like, but that's not actually what I mean. And that's when he starts busting out all the quotes and all the references to Guishan and blah, blah,
I'd
blah.
imagine as like a teacher, and maybe professors do this, you know, to check in if the students are really listening, they'll say one thing for half of the lesson, and then halfway through, they'll start saying the opposite. They might look for the students who, you know, raise their hands and be like, well, you know, now you're saying the opposite thing. So I can imagine that as kind of a, at the very least, a fun little prank to play on your students to see if they're actually listening. But
yeah. Well, if we entertain that idea, I'm not, and I know you weren't saying that, but just to clarify, you know, I don't think it would necessarily be that he would say the incorrect thing and then switch it, so much as say something that could easily be taken as, oh, so that means blah blah blah, and then, you know, maybe that's a letting down the hook, if you will, to see if any student goes, okay, so blah blah blah, and it's like, nope, it's actually, but it's not that. I don't mean it exactly as that. You know, take out your pacifier. Fun fact, when I was a little kid, when I was a baby, I would not do a pacifier. I just threw it out. I knew that shit wasn't real. They gave me a cup, and I took the cup. Just saying, I'm very proud of that.
I now have an image of a hook as a pacifier.
So yeah, dude, pass a hook.
Yeah.
Hook a fire.
Then he rips it out.
I barely know her.
Nice.
Uh-oh.
Well, how does your verse sound?
Sixth consciousness inactive. He puts forth the question. The adepts have both discerned where he's coming from. On the boundless, swift-flowing water, tossing a ball. When it comes down, it doesn't stay. Who can watch it? I think this verse is sort of another specific turn, right? The Zuedo, who wrote this verse, we're back talking about the case.
Yeah.
We're talking about the monk and Joshu, which is more of the Zen convention, I'll say. So which gives, and I do want to say as a disclaimer, listener, you may be thinking we're full of shit, but read the book.
And buy it.
You can the changes in Yan Mu's speech and what he says, especially against the Kita, are evident the more you put it in context. And then we have Zuedo. But it'll be exciting to see what he says about Zuedo's verse. Because I didn't read that in preparation for the cast today. It was only a little 2 paragraphs here, so.
He makes a reference to another case that I believe we've done before, where in a previous verse about Joshu and the same guy Daozu in case 41 of the Blue Cliff record, which, in case it sparks some memory, is called the Joshu's Man Who Has Died the Great Death, right? How is it meant when a man who's died the great death returns to life? He must not go by night, he must get in daylight. So we've talked about that case before. Yanwu references that in this and says, in a previous verse about that one, Zuidao said, in living there's an eye, still it's the same as death. Why use anti-serum to test an adept? Or as we said before, what was it? Why use poison to test an enlightened guy? And then he goes on, since both these guys, Joshu and Daozu, were adepts, enlightened, he says, he's saying that this is why the poem includes that the adepts have discerned where he's coming from, on the boundless, swift-flowing water, tossing a ball. What else is there but tossing a ball on the boundless, swift-flowing water? And then Yanwu asks us, do all of you people know what this really means, this moment-to-moment non-stop flow? At the end, Zuidao, the guy who wrote the poem, has people set eyes on it for themselves and watch. Hence it says, where it comes down, it doesn't stay. Who can watch it? This is Zuidao's living line, thinking about the sword that kills and gives life. But say, what does it really mean? And I'm just going to plant the seed before we get into that for later of this idea of kind of watching yourself live life, but not necessarily in a detached or dissociated way, but in a, okay, this is happening. Now this is happening. Now this is happening. But also like, oh, I'm feeling upset right now. Okay, I'm feeling angry right now. Oh, I'm blinded right now.
Right, without making it about concentration or about non-concentration.
Yeah, sometimes you concentrate, sometimes you don't.
Right.
A blonde went to the grocery store and was stuck in the frozen aisle section because it said orange concentrate.
I think this is one of those cases, whether or not it's kind of a hook by Yanwu, where, you could pull some Zazen stuff. What you just described is what I hear about Zazen meditation. It's like just, letting things happen and recognizing it. Not necessarily focusing on a dot or anything like that.
Except Yanwu was saying it's always
Right, it's always happening.
It's already happening.
Right, and again,
it's already happening.
One case out of
moment to moment, nonstop flow.
A lot, yeah. But it is interesting. We really want practice. I don't want to go on to that too much, but if you don't give someone to do like a practice, they, it's pretty tough, I'd imagine.
I think temperament is part. I think some people don't work well with that model, and some people do, and I don't think one's necessarily ideal versus the other. But we know at least one. You can't use that model in Zen. So if you are of that temperament, you got to use the practice mentality for other things. We have the people who check things off their list and they have a plan and they do well for things where it's like, when I was in school, I used to describe them as chemist types. You follow a recipe and then you document and then you report the results and you rinse and repeat. And then you have the more exploratory blah, blah, blah. And they, some are more useful in some cases than others. And I would say neither are useful in this case, because I wouldn't say this is a matter where usefulness comes into play. But I definitely see a lot of people feeling more comfortable with a practice where, because if they're like, I'm having existential crises, but I'm doing this, and then even though I'm still having them, if I keep doing this, supposedly they're going to stop. And so that helps. I think it helps alleviate that emotion. Does it help enlightenment? No. But in fact, it probably actively delays it. I'm not going to say hinder, but I will say delay, because time
it certainly emphasizes narrative in a way that...
Yeah, and conception.
Also, let's not pretend that Zazen actually does that, right? So...
Yeah.
We've met plenty of Zazeners. All of us have.
I think it could... it gives you something to look forward to.
I would be fine with, What's that?
it can give you like a original sin kind of deal where it's like, okay, if I pray this morning or meditate, I did good today. I went to church. I did my
And then you
thing.
hate yourself
Well,
for the
there's
rest of the
Right.
day. I'm not doing it
Yeah,
all.
well, there's just no science that like the type of zazen that would be preached in a Zen temple is healthy.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
The gray matter studies and
sitting
stuff like
itself
that
is not healthy
meditation
for
in
you.
general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even Foyan and his stuff recommends, look, if your mind's all fucked up, sit down, meditate for a minute, settle down.
Eat something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tool.
Yeah, take it when you're tired, sleep. It's not some sort of crazy thing.
Yeah.
And I'm loving this, so I'm just going to keep reiterating points. So here, after the poem and the commentary on the poem, Yanwu starts to go into a little bit more of a normal Yanwu thing. He says stuff like this: when you get to this realm, then you overcome dragons and subdue tigers. Die sitting or die standing up. Right now, people should just take the myriad phenomena before their eyes and put them to rest at once. But right before that, he just mentions a baby. Right, so he's saying the same stuff he always says, except he's basically adding the word baby in this idea of like the baby being the mind of non-activity and stuff.
It's this new catchphrase
So it would,
from this part
yeah.
out of the Blue Cliff record.
What's that?
Oh, you haven't read the cases after this, where every time at the end of his comment, he'll, where will all of you go to secure your bodies and establish your lives, baby? Like he just starts adding baby to the end of his sentences.
Yeah, the Blue Cliff record is actually a grooming process,
Oh,
which no comment.
maybe in some translations, right? Or in some schools.
But anyway, yeah, I think he's having fun, and maybe he's not trolling us. Maybe, and like I said at the beginning, he's just talking about shit he likes.
Right.
Or maybe he's laying down some of his really hardcore personal beliefs, or maybe he's laying down a trap for us. I can very clearly see that being the case. Maybe within the context of these few cases in this book, there's a bigger mind state change that he's looking to get. When I say mind state change, he's just like when your professor asks you hard questions.
Right, or asks you, gives you a pop quiz on the first chapter you read, or the beginning of the class, right? Makes you remember everything.
Right. Yeah, I don't mean mind state as in like from angry to nice.
Also, imagine the frustration of, he's essentially a Zen professor in terms of, like, if we're going to pick a word. The frustration of student after student comes in and they're playing guitar, but their hands do this thing and it's like not useful. It's like, no, stop doing this with your hands, start doing this. But they're so dead set on doing it this way with their hands, and that's why it doesn't sound right.
Or feel right.
And like they're not able to play the songs that they want. And then he gets a guy who's never played guitar before. He's like a new. Thank God. Okay, do this. Don't listen to any of these other guys telling you to do this shit. And I'm sure that's maybe part of his. God, if people just came in here like newborns, God, it'd be saving me so much time, so much frustration.
Yeah, just be like a newborn. Be dumb.
And for listeners who don't think Zen masters get frustrated, definitely check out the sayings of Yunmin. Right. There are, or Linji, and then we'll just hear any story about Daishan, right? We get Linji shouting people to leave. We get Daishan whacking people with the staff. We get Yunmin chasing the monks out of the hall, maybe 30% of the cases or sayings.
Nansen's kind of a dick, too.
He's a dick, but he's in the sayings where like he probably got laid the night before with Joshu. He's a little bit more chill, but that explains why his demeanor's better. For the listener, Joshu's who mentioned in this case, his lover in Master Nansen they were lovers. Right. That's my personal, for intellectual honesty, that's my personal findings.
Well,
I found that out.
What's curious about that is, while Nansen was the master, technically speaking, he was actually the sub in the relationship, while Joshi was the dom.
I was wondering how to do that. But clearly, if one of them was the top, it was clearly Joshu.
Yeah.
It's clearly Joshu. Though, if it was Zen, they probably docked.
Right.
Either docked or back to back, right?
What is it? Never come down to meet.
Men never descend to meet. In Zen, we must never descend. Right. You must 69 facing the same way.
Or it's a docking procedure, if I've ever heard one, right? But I haven't heard many. Now I've been in.
Make the letter H. Yeah. Anyways, now that we got that out of our system, but I do.
Yeah.
This on the swift flowing water. Do you guys ever feel like that? Do you feel that all the time? Are you like, well, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know. If I'm really fast. Sometimes I go to sleep and like I feel like I'm rushing around. I can't quite describe it, but it's like my body is moving and swaying a lot, but I'm just still. That has nothing to do with it, but that's when I think of rushing water. That's the closest sensation I feel.
But where it comes down, it doesn't stay. Who can watch it? And that's the key point there. I think it doesn't stay. So who can watch it?
Yeah. Even in the image of putting the ball in the stream, what they're gonna have perfect sight of the stream for how long? Right.
In one of the notes, Yanwu says, "It's gone by. Even a swift hawk cannot overtake it. You must still check it out." So if nobody can grab onto it while it's going, how can you keep track of it? As we say in America, be the ball.
Right. Or go back to the McDonald's play area and grab another one, right? Bad joke. Sorry.
Did you say go back to the McDonald's and grab a ball?
You know, the ball pits.
Oh, from the ball pit. Oh, dude. It's like, I'll show the Hamburglar what's up. I'm the ball burglar.
There you go, yeah. I used to hide in there so my parents couldn't find me, and I'd stay at McDonald's. I always thought it'd be a better place to live. They always found me. It wasn't as deep as I thought. So
pro moves. Yeah. You go to the bathroom in there to make sure it's yours. No one else can get you then.
Right, yeah. Classic.
Like a newborn baby, right?
Receive it on the riverbank. That's cool.
Oh.
Yeah. That's the very last comment to the poem that we get from Yanwu. Do you want to elaborate / read that part, Brian?
Yeah, so I'll do Zuedo's poem real quick. Sixth conscious in activity, he puts forth a question. The adepts have both discerned where he's coming from. On the boundless, swift-flowing water, tossing a ball. When it comes down, it doesn't stay. Who can watch it? Which is sort of how we were just referencing and kind of ending there. Then Yanwu to that says, watch it and you'll go blind. It's gone. Quote, receive it on the riverbank, unquote.
Now, I don't know how much I want to relate that because I don't know if it fits. But that did just bring to mind the travel by night. Let it travel by night and hang out at day. Hang out at dawn. Receive it at dawn.
I think it's interesting that there was receiving at all. The last note was receiving.
Yeah, and he puts that in quotes. So Yanwu himself puts it in quotes. The receive it on the riverbank. Which means he's letting us know that he's speaking poetically, referentially. Which doesn't negate it, but it
adds nuance.
Maybe a clue.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was some implication of, well, there is a spot where you can go back and pick the ball up.
Or it comes to you.
But you don't need to watch it.
Yeah.
Like the picture's there, right? The ball will eventually, it'll hit a stick or something. It'll be on the riverbank.
Or when you do watch it, you're blind. And it's gone. Once you look at it, it's gone. Which might go with my earlier theory.
So what comes to mind,
No.
I don't know if it makes sense, but just as it is in the river, it can also be out on the riverbank.
Well, regardless of it, where can you be? Can you be in the river? Can you be on the riverbank?
Fuck.
Yanwu says after the line, the adepts have both discerned where he's coming from. Speaking of receiving, coming from. Yanwu says, what's the need? Still, one must distinguish initiated from native, or pardon me. That's twice.
Naive.
Initiated from naive. Just experience it, then you'll know, which is interesting in the case after talking about a baby, right? So distinguish initiated from naive, just experience it, then you'll know. Just get enlightened, and then you'll figure this out. Well, I guess you won't figure it out, but it'll stop being gibberish.
Yeah, so the Zuedo says the adepts have both discerned where he's coming from. And then and Yanwu says, well, what's the why? What's the need? Why do that? That still one must distinguish initiated from naive. Just experience it, then you'll know. That's very tricky. Just experience it, then you'll know why. But
Well, does he say you'll know why? Or does he just say you'll know?
then you'll know, right? Well, he says, what's the need? But he does just say, then you'll know. He might be just saying, then you'll know. But you also might know the need. But I'm not willing to concede that he means know as in knowledge.
Well, we can talk. That's cool that the way you said that, you might know what the need is, right? It's like, you can tell I needed to because I did, right? What's the need for
Yeah,
them to do
exactly.
this? Well, the ball's floating in the riverbank and it went this way. So,
Right.
that answers the whole need to. I mean, how often do you say a thing and people say, well, why did you feel the need to say that? And it's like, it doesn't always have to work that way. Sometimes you'll just do shit.
And I think by experience it, we don't even need to be talking about enlightenment. We can be talking about the quote unquote, whatever the thing that the need arises from, right?
Yeah,
Just
I like that.
just experience it like a baby and you'll know what the need is. Hot coffee. Smoke on the other side of the mountain.
If I have to poop, cry.
If I have to cry, poop.
There you go.
Very fun to read.
I really like this just wombo combo of the first line for the listener is going to be the poem. The second line is Yanwu. On the boundless, swift-flowing water, tossing a ball, consistent from beginning to end, it's gone. What is he saying? That consistent from beginning to end, it's gone is that's what I'm going to remember. That's a no matter how rough the water, the moon reflected on the waves. That's one of those. Don't you see that your master goes to the highest hells, or the highest peaks and the lowest hells with you, all just to save you, right? On the boundless, swift-flowing water, tossing a ball, consistent from beginning to end, it's gone. Do we want to at least address the raft metaphor to say if we think this is relevant to that or not? Because I don't think it is. But people who hear the receive it on the riverbank might think of the ball being the raft. And for listeners who aren't thinking about that, there's this meme in Buddhism of like, the teachings are like a raft, and then once you get to the other side, you can then leave the raft and leave the river. Except in Zen, there is no other side. You're never done.
You're never done, but someday you sit on the ashes.
Yeah. As they say about Deshan, this man will one day climb Mount Sumeru, or not even climb, sit upon Mount Sumeru and establish a solitary hermitage there, or whatever they say. The thing about Deshan is he's so good, but how good was he as a teacher? Though I guess Soto gets their name from him, so I guess maybe he was pretty good at starting a dynasty, the Caodong lineage. What about you guys, Jin, Brian? You guys got any Do we want to talk about why he references? Because we talked about the references early on, but we didn't really talk about what he was referencing.
I looked up a lyric. It reminded me that was after you quoted from the beginning to end, it's consistent. It's not there. Right, something like that.
Consistent from beginning to end, it's gone.
It's gone. So at first I took that consistent from beginning to end, then it's gone. Or is it saying consistent from beginning to end? It was never there, so to speak. It's gone throughout that period.
What's the question? Is it
Right.
consistent from beginning to end, and now it's gone?
Right.
Right. Or is the consistency from beginning to end gone? Or is it just something that just the words, if they strike, they strike, and if they don't, they don't?
Right. And this
Because for your next sentence, what is he saying?
I was reminded of
Look,
a
if-
lyric from Nick Drake from Pink Moon, not the song but the album, and I don't know if it relates, but I was just reminded of it. It's called No. It's a very short song, 4 verses. It goes, "You know that I love you, you know I don't care, you know that I see you, you know I'm not there." That's it. I was just reminded of that. But
Can you say that again?
you know that I love you, you know I don't care, you know that I see you, you know I'm not there.
Ah,
I
as
like it.
Fall Out Boy once wrote, "I'm supposed to love you."
I'd play it, but he plays in that different tuning. I'd have
Right.
the tune different.
Yeah, recently Brian covered a Pink Moon, the song. It was very good with his daughter and wife.
Speaking of, I'm not gonna make the joke now. Speaking of streams, speaking of flowing down streams,
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's not my place.
yeah, my place is
Should have brought the baby on as the guest for
Right.
this one.
I mean,
She's every week is a new thing. And this week it's yelling. It would have worked.
it's what?
Yelling. She just goes, ah!
Oh.
Thunderous cry, the shout of Linji.
Yeah.
She's learning.
She curls her lips.
Oh, that's adorable.
I wonder how many of these people who think literally the way to be is like, you must be like a newborn baby. I wonder how many of them have newborn babies.
Right, and just copy them.
Like, this is the way to be. Just you're like borderline insomniac. Beast.
I had something else I was going to say, but it escaped me. But I'll hold it hostage, and
It's
it'll
gone.
come. Oh, I was gonna mention. This is sort of a in-depth case to talk about, because honestly, we could also talk about the philosophy and metaphysics, and I just think this makeup of the cast maybe isn't. That's not what we would do, but I think we could have another cast on this with certain other people who maybe would talk about some of these things and the psychology of it.
I almost wondered
But-
if you would just try to shoot it down though.
Well, yeah.
So maybe there's
Yeah,
maybe that works.
but I mean, you could probably fill 45 minutes of shooting it down.
Yeah.
I mean, we have Sakita, so.
And I was gonna mention, like, don't be discouraged. I promise you, this book is so jam-packed with shit that if you don't get something, just move on.
Oh yeah, in anything Zen, for a listener who wants to start like reading like
Yeah.
the actuals and masters who we get this name from. And yeah, I know Zen comes from Chan, which comes from Jiana, but really like the golden age of Zen in China is what made Zen. But anyways, yeah, if it's gibberish, just keep going.
Right.
You
What are you
know?
going to do? Stare at the ball? Right? You'll go blind.
And it's not even like a push-through thing. It's just like, the next thing's gonna be really cool.
Yeah. And then you'll be
You don't-
40 cases later and you'll see a thing and go, oh, wait, that's what that one thing meant. 40
Right.
cases. Like mine, like when I was picking a case, like I have, like when I first read this, I think I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. I have folds on the top of the page, and then sometimes it's a double fold, and then a fold from the bottom, or a double fold or a triple fold. Like as I was going through it, I made like a this seems like a thing, and then I just had like this folding code that I made for dog earing it. And for listeners who don't do that, I like my books to look red. Okay. Anyways, but as my dad once said, I have to give him that poetry. But anyways, yeah. So and you can end up with that, and then like the reason I brought that up is because I can see evidence of like when I first read this, because I haven't taken them away since I read it the first time. You know, oh well, yeah, that was a moment where I was like, oh.
I think,
As Fall Out Boy once said, I'm still trying. That's more than I can say for him.
yeah, I think in general, it's in my experience, studying it with people is also super helpful. It's like editing a paper.
Sangha, right?
Right, exactly.
Is Sangha a necessary thing for Zen? No, but like there's a reason that it came up.
Right.
You know, it's the same thing as Athens, really. And this gets to a thing I was debating getting into earlier, which is like when I was taking quantum, and it was my first like class dedicated to quantum. Like it was officially just called quantum mechanics. And then as relatively early on in the class, after like maybe a couple of weeks, he's like, now a lot of times people can philosophize themselves to death with quantum mechanics, and there's a certain amount of know the modeling first, but there is a certain amount of philosophy that needs to be addressed and is appropriate to be addressed in this. And that was the first time I've ever seen him explicitly state this. And then we talked about that beforehand. And with Zen, if you find yourself getting, asking philosophical or metaphysical questions or things like that, I don't think the useful move is to then say, well, no, fuck those. I'm not, okay, if I had this question put down, it must not be it, right? I think it's appropriate, and that's just keep going on, I think a bit of philosophy is appropriate for anything, right? I mean, we all know the Wikipedia game. You just keep clicking a link, and eventually, if you don't get caught in a mini loop, you end up at the page for philosophy, and that's not an accident. Philosophy is the study of the coherency of language itself, or maybe the practice of it, the refining of it. But so anything in Zen is beyond words and scriptures, but that doesn't mean you don't talk about it via words and scriptures. They're just pointers. But I mean, we have some things talking about the receive it on the riverbank. We have Yan Wu, his first reference from the his first reference on this page, I guess, from the Nirvana scripture. This other Zen master, Shan, said, does he smell it before or after his concentration? Does he smell it before or after his concentration? The monk said, you've flowed, teacher. Shan said, receive it on the riverbank. And that actually gives me some credence to my thought earlier about the traveling by night, receiving it by day. You flowed, teacher. You gave me it. And then he's like, receive it on the river. And then we follow this up with Yan Wu saying, again, the Sarangama scripture says, the fullness of the six consciousnesses enters to merge in the fullness of the storehouse consciousnesses, going to the realm of consciousnesses. That gibberish uses the same word too many times. Get it out. I'm done. Forget that. Yeah, it'll fit into a zip file nicely, but I don't care about that. Okay, again, the Lankavatara, the Lunky Sutra says, birth of signs being obstructed by grasping. Again, being obstructed by grasping. Birth of conception, false thinking. Birth of flow, pursuing falsehood, revolving, and flowing. You must get out of the third aspect, quote, birth of flow, end quote. Only then you'll be joyfully alive and independent. It doesn't say grasping is the birth of signs. It says being obstructed by it. It doesn't say thinking is the birth of conception. It says false thinking. It doesn't say that pursuing is the birth of flow. It says pursuing falsehood, revolving, and flowing. Also, he doesn't use an Oxford comma, and I'm upset about that. I give a fuck about it. And for listeners who are at this point, they're like, I heard a bunch of words. What the hell do any of these mean? Like we said earlier, you just keep cruising.
Just enjoy the noise.
Yeah, right. If Freedom works, and I love Freedom, and I put on Freedom and don't have any bring them talk to each other, and they know that they exist. They talk about it on the show.
Mm-hmm.
But why not read Zen while you're falling asleep? This shit will put you asleep too, which is great. That's how I went through the Book of Record. When I first read it, I would just open it up and read a case or two a night and wait till I passed out. It was it was the end of my bedtime ritual. It was a great way to knock yourself out. You know, if I read,
Yeah, I've been reading every day after I get off work, and I always end it with a nap.
Nice.
every single one of the Zen books, that is how I've read them. Every single one. Like all the sayings text, that just became the new book on my nightstand, and I would just read that till I passed out. And sometimes I managed to turn off the light to the little lamp that I bought before I passed out. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes it might take 3 nights. For me to read one case, because I just keep passing out the first paragraph. I don't care, right?
Probably,
It's like,
yeah.
what are you in a rush for?
Might even help. Yeah.
If you die ahead of time, it doesn't matter if you didn't read, right? So either you can say for pretty much anything. Like I will either die first or learn Chinese. Like one of those 2 events will happen first. Like, and I could just say that, right? I will either die first or climb Mount Everest. One of those 2 will happen
Right.
first. So it's like,
It's funny because it makes it sound like you're gonna do it real soon.
yeah. A lot of times when I say that, people get real wide-eyed. No, but like I'm speaking philosophically.
Right. Yeah.
Not suicidal, okay? Now, for the listener, being suicidal but not being suicidal, neither of those are Zen. It's not about the destruction of the self. It's not about the destruction of the body. But it's also not about attachment of the self and attachment of the body. When 4 elements separate, where will you go? And with that, where are we going to go, Jim?
I have a cut on my hand. That's all.
Well, we just read a bunch of Zen, so it's time for bed.
It's time for bed. Oh, I missed it. All right. Well, I wasn't watching the ball. So, thank you for listening to another episode of Not Zen. I hope you had a great time. Dan, do you want to give our disclaimers, where to find us, where to, track us down, comment?
Yeah, I mean, same old, right? If you liked it, 5 stars. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your frenemies. But from at least a 6-foot distance, right? Just like kind of like shout whisper it in the Food Lion checkout line. Find us on Pornhub, find us on the YouTube, find us on the tweet, find us on Reddit, all spelled the same way, Zen the way Zen is not. Find us on the subreddit, give us some feedback. We're thinking about making some structure changes to the podcast, so we're very open to reception and feedback for stuff like that. If you have any cases that you really like or that you want us to tackle, or if you have any questions or complaints, feel free to hit us up with those. Just make sure that you leave them in a 5-star review. That way we see it, because probably won't see those 1 stars. And yeah. Beam me up, Jimmy.
Cool. This was Jim chugging homemade cottage cheese.
Circumcising myself. This was Dan.
Get it? Because newborn baby? Alright. Yeah. In case the viewer didn't get it. I thought that was pretty good.
I'm glad you explained it, because it didn't occur to me if somebody didn't get it. We haven't talked about the baby for, I guess,
Biramando, stop licking your lips. An outro.
Check.
I
check.
swear to God.
Check, please.
Heyo. All I
That's
see
my
is-
outro.
That's your. Oh, okay. All right.
Gotcha.
Well, thanks for listening to another episode of Not Zen. We'll see you next time.